The massive space station hung in the void like a twisted metal flower, its docking arms stretching out in all directions. Ships of every shape and size clung to its hull. Sleek predator vessels with weapon arrays that could level cities, brutal transport crafts built for war, and smaller hunter ships designed for quick strikes. This was Station Omega-7, known throughout the galaxy as a mercenary hub, where only the deadliest warriors came to find work. Inside the station's main hall, the air itself seemed to vibrate with danger. Creatures that had conquered entire worlds sat at metal tables, drinking alien liquors and comparing kill counts. The smell of different atmospheres mixed together, sulfur from the volcanic worlds, ozone from the storm planets, and a metallic scent of spilled blood that never quite left this place. Near the center of the chaos, a group of Korvaxi warriors dominated several tables. These bear-like creatures stood nearly 8 feet tall, their thick fur-covering muscles that could crush steel. Their claws, each as long as a human finger, scraped against the metal surfaces as they gestured wildly, telling stories of their latest battles. One of them, covered in ritual scars, roared with laughter as he described tearing through an enemy platoon with his bare hands. In the darker corners, veiled assassins moved like living shadows. These snake-like beings could barely be seen, their scales shifting colors to match their surroundings. When they did speak, it was in soft hisses that somehow carried more threat than the Korvaxi's roars. Their reputation for killing targets in their sleep had made them the most feared killers in 3 star systems. Floating near the ceiling, a group of Zephyrian war dancers spun in slow circles. These jellyfish-like creatures had transparent bodies filled with glowing poison that could kill with just a touch. They communicated through color changes that rippled across their forms like deadly rainbows. Even the other predators gave them space. At a small table in the corner sat a human. Tom Bradley looked completely out of place among these galactic killers. He was maybe 60 years old, with gray hair that was starting to thin on top. His face was weathered like old leather, marked by years of sun and stress. He wore a simple brown military jacket that had seen better days. The fabric was faded, and there were small tears that had been carefully repaired. His boots were scuffed but well-maintained, the kind soldiers wore when they cared about their gear. He sat quietly, sipping from a cup of black coffee that he'd somehow managed to find in this alien place. His hands were steady, calloused from years of work, with old scars across his knuckles. He didn't fidget or look around nervously, like most humans would in this situation. Instead, he just sat there, patient and calm, like he was waiting for a bus rather than surrounded by the galaxy's most dangerous creatures. The other mercenaries noticed him, of course. How could they not? Humans were rare out here in the deep systems, and those who did venture this far usually stayed close to their own kind or hired heavy protection. This one sat alone, looking like someone's grandfather who had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. A young Korvaxi warrior, his fur still bright and unmarked by battle scars, pointed at Tom and growled something to his pack. They all turned to look, and their laughter rumbled through the hall like distant thunder. The joke spread from table to table. Look at the old human, sitting there like he belongs with real warriors. Some of the aliens made betting gestures, wagering on how long he would last if someone decided to make him an example. The veiled assassins were less obvious, but no less amused. Their scales rippled with colors that meant mockery in their language. One of them slithered closer to Tom's table, probably planning to intimidate the old human for sport. But something made the creature stop just short of Tom's chair. The Velitha's head tilted, confused, before it retreated back to shadows. Above them all, the station's central AI was working. This advanced system could analyze any creature that came aboard, measuring threat levels based on thousands of factors: physical strength, reaction time, weapon skills, psychological profiles, even pheromone signatures that revealed a being's killer instinct. It was never wrong. The AI scanned each new arrival as they entered. A Korvaxi berserker registered as threat level 8. A Velith assassin came back as level 9. The Zephyrian war dancers maxed out the scale at level 10. Then it turned its sensors toward the quiet human in the corner. The scanning beam swept over Tom Bradley multiple times. Advanced algorithms processed the data, cross-referenced it with millions of profiles, and ran probability calculations. But instead of a number, Something else appeared on the security monitors throughout the station. Error. Cannot classify. Subject analysis incomplete. The AI tried again. And again. Each time, the same message appeared. In all its years of operation, scanning millions of beings from across the galaxy, the system had never encountered anything it couldn't categorize. Tom Bradley just kept drinking his coffee, completely unaware that every security officer on the station was now staring at their screens in confusion. The mission briefing came through the station's communication system at dawn. A rebel mining colony on Kepler, 442b, had declared independence and was refusing to pay their corporate taxes. The job was simple. Go in, take control, and restore order. Payment was 50,000 credits, split 3 ways. Tom Bradley found himself assigned to Team Delta alongside 2 aliens who clearly weren't happy about the arrangement. The first was Thrak, a Korvaxi warrior who stood nearly 9 feet tall and weighed at least 400 pounds. His dark brown fur was marked with white scars from previous battles, and his claws could slice through steel plating. He wore minimal armor, preferring to rely on his natural toughness and regeneration abilities. The second team member was Vera, a Velit assassin whose scales shifted between dark green and black depending on her mood. She moved with the fluid grace of a predator, her long tail swishing behind her as she walked. Twin poison glands behind her jaw could deliver a toxin that would drop most creatures in seconds. Her weapon of choice was a curved blade that seemed to bend light around its edge. As they boarded the transport ship, both aliens made their feelings clear about their human teammate. "I cannot believe they paired us with this," Thrak rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "Look at him. No claws, no natural armor, no venom. What use is a creature that needs tools just to survive?" Vera's scales rippled with amusement. "At least he might serve as a distraction while we do the real work. The rebels will waste ammunition shooting at him." Tom just nodded politely and checked his equipment. He carried a standard plasma rifle, nothing fancy, along with a few basic supplies in a worn backpack. Compared to his teammates' natural weapons and high-tech gear, he looked severely outgunned. The 3-hour journey to the mining colony gave the aliens plenty of time to plan their assault strategy, which mostly involved charging straight at the enemy and overwhelming them with superior firepower and natural abilities. Tom listened quietly, occasionally asking simple questions about the colony's layout and defenses. "Why do you need to know about their supply lines?" Vera asked with irritation when Tom inquired about the rebels' food and ammunition storage. "Just curious," Tom replied with a shrug. Kepler, 442b, was a dusty, reddish planet with thin atmosphere and harsh winds. The mining colony sat in a valley surrounded by rocky hills, its buildings clustered around the main excavation site. As their ship approached, automated defense turrets opened fire, forcing them to land several miles away. The trio made their way across the barren landscape toward the colony. Through his binoculars, Tom could see the defensive positions the rebels had set up: barricades at key choke points, sniper nests in the higher buildings, and what looked like improvised explosive devices placed along the most obvious approach routes. "Perfect," Thrak growled, cracking his knuckles. "They have made themselves a fortress. We will smash through their walls and show them the price of defiance." Vera's scales darkened with anticipation. "I will take the high positions first. Their snipers will not see me coming until it is too late." Both aliens were practically vibrating with excitement as they prepared to charge into battle. This was what they lived for: the thrill of combat, the chance to prove their superiority over lesser beings. They had done this hundreds of times before on dozens of worlds. Tom studied the colony layout for a few more minutes, then quietly walked away from his teammates. They were so focused on their battle plans that they didn't notice him disappear into the rocky terrain to their left. The assault began exactly as expected. Thrak roared a battle cry and charged straight down the main approach to the colony, his massive form shrugging off the rebels' initial gunfire. His thick hide absorbed most of the damage, and his natural healing factor sealed up the wounds almost as quickly as they appeared. Vera took a more subtle approach, using her camouflage scales to blend with the rocky hills as she worked her way toward the sniper positions. Her plan was to eliminate the long-range threats before they could pin down her partner. Both strategies might have worked against typical opponents. But these weren't typical opponents. They were humans, and humans had spent thousands of years learning how to kill things bigger and stronger than themselves. The rebels had prepared for exactly this kind of direct assault. As Thrak charged through their outer defenses, he triggered a series of carefully placed charges that brought down part of the hillside, partially burying the massive warrior under tons of rock. While he struggled to free himself, crossfire from hidden positions raked his exposed flanks. Vera found herself in an even worse situation. The human snipers had anticipated her approach and set up interlocking fields of fire that covered every possible path to their positions. Worse, they had thermal imaging that could spot her even through her natural camouflage. She found herself pinned down behind a boulder, unable to advance or retreat safely. That's when Tom made his move. While his teammates had announced their presence with all the subtlety of a thunderstorm, Tom had spent the first hour of the battle doing something entirely different. He had been watching, learning, and waiting. He identified the rebels' communication lines, their supply routes, and most importantly, their command structure. Tom didn't attack the strongest points in their defense. Instead, he quietly disabled their power generator, cutting electricity to their automated turrets. He sabotaged their radio equipment, leaving the different defensive positions unable to coordinate with each other. He even managed to contaminate their water supply with a harmless but foul-tasting additive from his pack. Within 2 hours, the rebel colonists found themselves fighting blind and desperate, their carefully prepared defenses falling apart one piece at a time. But Tom still wasn't finished. Instead of pressing his advantage with violence, he did something his alien teammates couldn't understand. He walked up to the colony's main gate, unarmed, and asked to speak with their leader. The cantina on Station Omega 7 never truly slept. Even during the station's designated night cycle, creatures from dozens of worlds gathered to drink, trade stories, and plan their next kills. But tonight felt different. Conversations were quieter, and more than a few pairs of alien eyes kept glancing toward one particular corner table. Tom Bradley sat alone, nursing a glass of something that barely qualified as whiskey. Word about the mining colony operation had spread through the station faster than a plasma fire. The details got more incredible with each telling, but the core facts remained the same. The quiet human had somehow accomplished in hours what should have taken days of bloody fighting. At the bar, a cluster of Korvaxi warriors spoke in hushed growls. Thrak says a human appeared and disappeared like smoke. One of them rumbled. Never saw him coming. Never heard him leave. Just found the rebels' defenses falling apart piece by piece. That is not how war works, another protested. You face your enemy with strength and courage. You do not skulk around like a scavenger. Tell that to Thrak's wounds, the first warrior replied. He spent 3 days in the medical bay. The human walked away without a scratch. Similar conversations echoed throughout the cantina. Vera had shared her own account with the other Veiled assassins, though her version focused more on Tom's strange mercy toward the surrendering colonists. He could have killed them all, she hissed to her fellow predators, had them completely at his mercy. But instead he negotiated, found a solution that let everyone live. What kind of warrior shows weakness like that? But it wasn't weakness, and some of the smarter aliens were beginning to understand that. The Nexari traders, who made their living by understanding different species, whisper among themselves about human psychology. They do not fight for sport or dominance, one explained to a confused Korvaxi. They fight to solve problems. This makes them far more dangerous than simple predators. 3 more missions had followed the mining colony job, each one adding to Tom's growing reputation. On Rigel 7, he had tracked down a group of pirates who had been raiding supply convoy for months. While other bounty hunters had tried to catch them in space battles, Tom studied their patterns and simply waited at their base when they returned. The pirates surrendered without firing a shot after finding their hideout, surrounded by carefully placed charges. The job on Proxima Station was even stranger. A gang of Caltharian slavers had taken hostages and barricaded themselves in the lower levels. The station security wanted to storm in with overwhelming force, but Tom suggested cutting off their escape routes and waiting. When the slavers realized they had no way out, they released the hostages in exchange for safe passage off the station. No one died, and the hostages went home to their families. "It makes no sense," complained a scarred Caltharian warrior to his drinking companions. "Where's the honor in victory without battle? Where's the glory in defeating an enemy who never fights back?" But the most disturbing incident had happened just 2 days ago. A group of young Mindari scouts had been hired to track down a rogue AI that had taken control of a research facility. These psychic aliens were known for their ability to read thoughts and predict enemy movements. They considered the mission easy money: find the AI's central core and shut it down. Tom had volunteered to join the team, claiming he had experience with rogue AIs. The Mindari leader, a pale blue creature with large black eyes, had agreed mostly out of curiosity. They wanted to understand what made this strange human so different from other warriors they had encountered. The mission itself went smoothly. Tom's knowledge of AI systems proved invaluable in navigating the facility's security measures. But it was during the return journey that the Mindari made their mistake. Bored during a long space flight, they decided to peek into Tom's mind. Reading alien thoughts was a common pastime for their species, like watching entertainment programs. They expected to find simple human emotions: fear, anger, pride, maybe some interesting memories of past battles. What they found instead left them speechless for hours. Now, 2 of those same Mindari sat at a corner table in the cantina, their normally bright skin pale with shock. They spoke in whispers to each other, occasionally glancing at Tom with what could only be described as terror. "We should not have looked," one of them said, its mental voice trembling even in telepathic communication. "That mind, it is not like other predators. Other species think in terms of hunting or being hunted, killing or dying. Simple thoughts, easy to understand. But his mind," the second Mindari continued, "every thought is connected to a dozen others. Every memory links to tactics, strategies, possibilities we cannot even imagine. It is like looking into a war that never ends, where every moment is another calculation in an endless battle. And the memories," the first one shuddered, "wars we have never heard of, against enemies that no longer exist. His species has been fighting for so long that conflict has become part of their very nature. Not just individual fighting, but entire worlds working together to destroy other worlds." The second Mindari's skin flickered with patterns of fear. When we touched his thoughts, he knew we were there immediately, felt us probing around like insects. But instead of pushing us out, he just watched us, let us see what he wanted us to see, like he was teaching us a lesson. "What did you learn?" asked the third Mindari who had approached their table. Both creatures looked toward Tom, who was calmly finishing his drink. He glanced up, caught their gaze, and nodded politely before standing to leave. "We learned," the first Mindari whispered, "that we are not the hunters we thought we were." As Tom walked past their table toward the exit, conversations throughout the cantina gradually fell silent. Warriors who had conquered star systems stepped aside. Assassins who feared nothing melted back into the shadows. The station's most dangerous predators all had the same instinctive reaction. They recognized something in the quiet human that their deepest survival instincts told them to avoid. Tom Bradley, unaware of the effect he was having, simply nodded to the bartender and headed back to his quarters. He had another mission briefing in the morning. The entire station shook when Krax the destroyer's ship docked at Port 7. Even through the reinforced hull, everyone could hear the deep, rumbling sounds coming from his vessel, like the growl of some ancient beast that has swallowed a thunderstorm. Maintenance crews refused to service his ship, claiming the biosignatures coming from inside made their equipment malfunction. Krax belonged to the Uarthan species, and even among his own kind, he was considered exceptional. Standing 12 feet tall, his body was covered in natural armor that looked like polished black stone. Each piece of his carapace had been earned through combat. The Uarthan grew new protective plates every time they survived a life-threatening battle. Krax's armor was so complete that some xenobiologists claimed he was more machine than creature, but it was his feeding tentacles that made him truly terrifying. 6 thick appendages emerged from his back, each one capable of crushing steel or injecting a paralytic venom that kept victims conscious while he fed. The tentacles moved independently, constantly tasting the air around him, searching for threats or prey. When he walked, they writhed like living shadows, making it impossible to predict his next move. His reputation preceded him throughout the galaxy. Krax had single-handedly conquered the Vega system, personally killing every warrior who stood against him over the course of 3 years. The Centauri Defense Force had sent their best soldiers to stop him, an elite unit of genetically enhanced fighters with military-grade cybernetic implants. Krax had fought all 12 of them simultaneously and won. He wore pieces of their armor as trophies. When he entered the station's main cantina, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Conversations died mid-sentence as creatures that had never known fear suddenly remembered what the emotion felt like. Even the station's artificial gravity felt heavier, as if his presence alone added weight to the air. Krax surveyed the room with the casual interest of a predator selecting dinner. His 4 eyes, arranged in pairs on either side of his massive head, could see across multiple light spectrums simultaneously. He spotted Tom Bradley immediately, sitting at his usual corner table with a cup of coffee and a data pad. "So," Krax rumbled, his voice like grinding metal, "this is the ghost human everyone whispers about." The cantina fell completely silent. Even the ventilation system seemed to quiet down, as if the station itself was holding its breath. Tom looked up from his reading, studied the massive alien for a moment, then calmly took another sip of his coffee. "You know who I am, human?" Krax continued, moving closer. Each step made the deck plates groan under his weight. "I am Krax the Destroyer. I have ended civilizations. I have fed on the greatest warriors of 100 worlds." "I've heard of you," Tom replied quietly, not bothering to stand up. "Conquered the Vega system about 15 years ago. Fought the Centauri Defense Force on Proxima 3. Lost your left-feeding tentacle to a plasma mine on Kepler 186F, but grew back stronger." Krax stopped moving. His tentacles went perfectly still for the first time since entering the cantina. No one had ever spoken to him so casually about his own battles, especially not some small, soft creature that looked like it belonged in a retirement home. "You have studied me," Krax said, and there was something like amusement in his voice. "Good. Then you know that challenging me means death." "I'm not challenging you," Tom said, turning a page on his data pad. "I'm just sitting here having coffee." The massive alien's tentacles began moving again, faster now, betraying his irritation. "I do not need you to challenge me, human. I challenge you. Here, in front of all these witnesses. Refuse, and I will kill you anyway for the insult of existing in my presence." Tom sighed and closed his data pad. Around the cantina, aliens who had seemed dangerous just minutes ago pressed themselves against the walls, desperate to get as far from the confrontation as possible. A few of the smarter ones quietly slipped out through the side exits. "The arena?" Tom asked. "The arena," Krax confirmed. 1 hour. No weapons except what nature gave us. Though in your case, that seems to be very little." As the massive creature turned and walked away, his tentacles knocked over chairs and tables in his wake. The other patrons began placing bets immediately, not on who would win, but on how long the human would survive. The most optimistic estimate was 30 seconds. Tom finished his coffee, left a tip for the bartender, and headed to his quarters to prepare. He had some reading to do. The arena was packed when fight time arrived. Station Omega-7's combat pit had hosted thousands of battles over the years, but nothing quite like this. The circular floor was bare metal 50 feet across, with viewing galleries rising up on all sides. Every seat was filled, and creatures were standing 3 deep at the railings. Krax entered first, and the crowd's reaction was immediate. Some species cheered, others fell silent in terror, and a few actually fled the arena entirely. He moved to the center of the ring and began a traditional You Are Then War dance, his tentacles weaving complex patterns while his carapace caught the arena lights like black mirrors. When Tom entered from the opposite gate, the contrast was almost comical. He wore simple gray clothing and carried nothing except a small water bottle. Compared to the alien destroyer, he looked like a child who had wandered into the wrong room. "Last chance to surrender, human," Krax called out, his voice echoing off the arena walls. "I will make your death quick if you ask nicely." Tom unscrewed the cap on his water bottle and took a drink. "Actually, I've been looking forward to this conversation." "Conversation?" Krax laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "We are here to fight, not talk." "Same thing, really," Tom said and smiled. The arena's starting bell rang, and Krax charged forward with devastating speed. His tentacles spread wide, ready to grab and crush his opponent. But Tom wasn't where the alien expected him to be. Instead of backing away or dodging to the side, the human had stepped forward and slightly left, positioning himself in the one spot where Krax's own massive body blocked 3 of his tentacles from reaching their target. "Interesting choice," Tom said conversationally as Krax spun to face him again. "Most UR then favor right side attacks because of how your nervous system developed. Your left tentacles are stronger, but your right ones are faster. You're compensating for the one you lost on Kepler, 186F. Krax's attack faltered for just a moment. How could this human know such details about UR anatomy? Tom continued talking while casually avoiding the alien's increasingly frustrated attacks. Your species evolved on a high-gravity world with 3 moons. The tidal stresses created a very specific inner ear structure that helps with balance. But it also means you get disoriented when fighting in artificial gravity that's constantly fluctuating. As if on cue, Tom kicked a specific panel on the arena floor. The gravity generators hiccuped for just a second, but it was enough. Krax stumbled, his massive form suddenly fighting against gravity that felt wrong. "The feeding tentacles are fascinating," Tom continued, now circling his opponent like professor giving a lecture. "They're not just weapons, they're sensory organs. You use them to taste emotions, fear especially. It's how you choose your prey." Krax straightened up, but his movements were less confident now. "How do you know this?" "I told you I've studied your species," Tom replied. 40 years of military intelligence reports, combat footage from the Vega campaign, autopsy records from Centauri Defense Force casualties. I probably know more about how UR fight than most UR do. The massive alien's tentacles had stopped their constant movement. For the first time in his life, Krax was uncertain. This human wasn't fighting like prey. He was fighting like a predator who had been studying his target for decades. "But here's the thing about feeding tentacles," Tom said, pulling something small from his pocket. "They're incredibly sensitive to certain chemical compounds, especially this one." He threw the object, just a small tablet that dissolved instantly in the arena's recycled air. Within seconds, Krax's tentacles began writhing uncontrollably, sending waves of pain through his nervous system. "Military-grade irritant," Tom explained as the alien destroyer collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed by sensory overload. "Completely harmless to most species, but to an UR it's like being electrocuted through every nerve ending." Krax tried to speak, to demand how this was possible, but his vocal cords weren't responding properly. The tentacles that had conquered star systems were thrashing wildly, completely beyond his control. Tom walked over and knelt down beside the fallen giant. "The mistake your species makes is thinking that being the apex predator means you can't be hunted. But humans learned a long time ago that everything can be hunted if you understand it well enough." For the first time in his centuries of existence, Krax the Destroyer looked up at another being and felt something he had never experienced before, the absolute certainty that he was about to die, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "Please," he whispered. Tom stood up and walked toward the arena exit. "The effects will wear off in about an hour. Consider this a learning experience." The arena had been silent for 3 full minutes after Tom Bradley walked out. Krax the Destroyer, the creature who had conquered entire star systems, lay curled on the metal floor like a wounded animal. His feeding tentacles had finally stopped thrashing, but he remained motionless, staring at nothing with all 4 eyes wide open in shock. In the viewing galleries, hundreds of the galaxy's most dangerous beings sat frozen in their seats. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The implications of what they had just witnessed were too massive to process immediately. A Korvaxi warrior who had been betting against the humans slowly closed his jaw, which had been hanging open since Tom casually poisoned the legendary destroyer. "That is not possible," he whispered to his packmate. "Krax has never been defeated, never even been injured in single combat. The human did not even fight," his companion replied in confusion. "There was no battle. No test of strength or speed. It was like watching a scientist dissect a specimen. In the lower galleries, a group of veiled assassins coiled and uncoiled nervously. Their entire culture was built around the concept of the perfect kill, striking from shadow with precision and leaving no trace. But what they had just seen was something beyond their understanding. Tom had defeated Krax not through stealth or surprise, but through pure knowledge. He had simply known exactly how to neutralize his opponent before the fight even began. The whisper started slowly, then grew into a rumbling murmur that filled the arena. The same questions echoed in dozens of different languages. What was this human? How had he known? Where did that knowledge come from? By the time Tom returned to his quarters, word had spread throughout the entire station. Creatures who had dismissed him as harmless prey now looked at him with something approaching terror. The maintenance crews refused to service the area near his room. Even the automated food dispensers seemed to malfunction when he approached. The station's command crew called an emergency meeting. Captain Vrex, a battle-scarred Nexary who had run Station Omega-7 for 20 years, found himself facing questions he couldn't answer. How had their security systems failed to identify this threat? What other surprises might this human be hiding? Run a deep scan on his ship, Vrex ordered the security chief. Full military analysis. I want to know everything about this creature. But when the results came back, they only deepened the mystery. Tom's ship was old, barely maintained, with outdated weapons and minimal defenses. His personal belongings consisted of military surplus gear, basic clothing, and an extensive collection of data files about alien species. Nothing that would explain how he had become the most feared being on a station full of galactic predators. The pressure finally reached a breaking point 3 days later. Tom was sitting in the cantina, reading his usual datapad and drinking coffee, when Captain Vrex himself approached his table. Behind the captain walked representatives from every major species on the station, Corvaxi pack leaders, Vila clan mothers, Mindari elders, and even a delegation of Uarthan warriors who had come to understand what had happened to their champion. "We need answers," Captain Vrex said without preamble. "The entire station is on edge. Half my security force is afraid to patrol the corridors. You have defeated our strongest warriors without breaking a sweat, and nobody understands how." Tom looked up from his reading and studied the gathered aliens. There were at least 30 of them, representing species that had waged war across the galaxy for millennia. All of them were looking at him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to outright fear. "You want to know what I am," Tom said quietly. "We know what you are," rumbled the Corvaxi elder. "You are human, but humans are weak, soft. They have no claws, no armor, no venom. They cannot even survive in most planetary environments without artificial assistance." Tom smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's true. Individually, humans are pretty pathetic compared to most galactic species. But you're making the same mistake that a lot of species have made over the years." He stood up slowly, and several aliens involuntarily stepped backward. "You assume that natural weapons make a species dangerous. But let me tell you something about humans that isn't in the standard databases." Tom walked over to Cantina's main display screen and called up a star chart showing human space. It was smaller than most alien territories, but the borders were marked with warning symbols that indicated heavy military presence. 40 years ago, when humans first started expanding beyond our home system, we ran into the same problem every new species faces. We were prey. The Draconian Empire tried to enslave us. The Caltharian Confederacy hunted us for sport. 3 different predator species decided that humans would make good food sources. The aliens listened in uncomfortable silence. Most of them remembered those early years, when humanity was just another primitive species ripe for conquest. But here's what those species didn't understand about humans, Tom continued, his voice growing harder. "We didn't evolve as prey animals. We evolved as hunters. Not fast hunters, not strong hunters, but persistent ones. We're the species that hunted mammoth to extinction with nothing but pointed sticks. We're the ones who turned wolves into pets and made them help us hunt other animals." He turned away from the star chart to face his audience directly, and when other species started hunting us, we did what humans have always done. We learned everything we could about our hunters, and then we turned the tables. The temperature in the cantina seemed to drop as Tom's words sank in. Captain Rex's security files contained classified reports about humanity's early wars, conflicts that were officially listed as territorial disputes, but had actually been brutal campaigns of survival. The Draconian Empire fell in 18 months, Tom said matter-of-factly. Turns out that a species evolved for direct confrontation has trouble dealing with opponents who attack their supply lines, their infrastructure, their civilian populations. The Caltharians lasted longer, almost 3 years, but they made the mistake of underestimating human creativity when it comes to weapons design. A veiled assassin in the back of the group hissed nervously, but those were wars between species. Fleet actions, planetary bombardments, not individual combat. You're right, Tom agreed, but wars teach you things about your enemies. Detailed things. How they think, how they fight, what their weaknesses are. And humans are very good at sharing that information. He gestured to his data pad, which was displaying detailed anatomical charts of UR-them biology. 40 years of military intelligence gathering. Combat reports from soldiers who fought and died learning how to kill creatures like cracks. Xenobiological studies of every species we've encountered in warfare. Medical records from our own casualties, showing exactly how alien weapons affect human physiology. The implications hit the gathered aliens like a physical blow. This wasn't just one unusually skilled human. This was a representative of a species that had spent decades systematically studying how to kill everything they encountered. I've read the autopsy reports from Centauri Defense Force soldiers killed by UR-them feeding tentacles, Tom said conversationally. I know the chemical composition of veiled venom and how it affects different nervous systems. I can tell you exactly how much force it takes to crack Korvaxi bone armor, and which frequencies of sound will disorient Mindari's psychic abilities. He picked up his coffee cup and took a sip, as if he was discussing the weather instead of detailed methods for killing everyone in the room. You fear me because you finally figure out what my species learned a long time ago. The most dangerous predator isn't the one with the biggest claws or the strongest armor. It's the one that chooses when and how to hunt. Tom finished his coffee and stood up to leave. Natural predators hunt when they're hungry or threatened. But humans, we hunt when we decide it's necessary. And we're very, very good at making that decision. As he walked toward the cantina exit, the crowd of aliens parted like water. These were creatures that had never known fear, beings that had conquered worlds through pure physical dominance. But they recognized something in the quiet human that their deepest survival instinct screamed was dangerous beyond measure. Captain Vrex watched Tom disappear down the corridor, then turned to his security console. The station's AI was still displaying the same message it had shown for days. Error, cannot classify. Now he understood why. The system wasn't designed to categorize a species that had turned warfare into a science.